Nobody puts a bumper sticker on their car that says, I invested in index funds and kept my housing costs low. Nobody posts that on Instagram. Nobody brags about it at a cookout, but plenty of people post the new house. The keys in hand, the front door, the "we did it" caption, and everyone likes it because the story makes sense. You worked hard, you saved, you bought the house. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what your parents did, what their parents did. And somewhere along the way, it became the operating system for how Americans think about getting ahead. The problem isn't the house, the problem is the number. Let me paint a picture. Two people, same age, same job, same salary, $105,000 a year. They both decide it's time to buy. They both get pre approved. And here's where the story splits. Person A reads that pre approval letter like it's a finish line $490,000. The lender ran the numbers and signed off on it. So it must mean something. They start looking at houses in that range. Find one at $485,000. Modern kitchen, big backyard, good school district. The payment is steep, but manageable. They make the offer. They close. They move in. Person B gets the same pre-approval, reads it, folds it, puts it in the junk drawer. Starts looking at homes between $280,000 and $310,000. Less sexy on paper, smaller rooms, slightly older neighborhood, makes the offer anyway. Closes in the spring. From the outside, person A looks like they're winning. Nicer house, nicer neighborhood, more to show for the money they've earned. Person B's place? A shrug. Fast forward 15 years. Person A has a beautiful home and $31,000 in their brokerage account. Person B has a smaller home and a brokerage account that just crossed $610,000. I'll explain exactly how that gap happened. But first, let's talk about why Person A's decision looked so reasonable at the time. The pre-approval process is designed to assess risk for the bank, not for you. Full stop. When a lender looks at your file, they're running ratios against your gross income, the number on your W-2 before taxes, before your 401k contribution, before the health insurance premium gets pulled. A household earning $105,000 gross sounds like a lot of room. But after federal taxes, FICA, maybe state tax depending on where you live, and typical pre-tax deductions, take-home lands somewhere around $68,000 to $72,000 a year. Call it $5,900 a month in your actual checking account. On that $485,000 house at 6.8% interest with a 10% down payment. So you're financing $436,500. Your principal and interest payment alone is about $2,855. Add property taxes. In many U.S. markets, that's anywhere from $350 to $600 a month on a home at that price point. Homeowners insurance, call it $175. PMI, since you didn't hit 20% down, another $190 or so. Total monthly housing number, roughly $3,570 to $3,820 on $5,900 take home. That's 60% to 65% of your real spendable income, walking straight out the door every month before you've paid for food, a car, utilities, childcare, a phone bill, or anything else that makes up a life. And the lender approved it. Because to the lender, the math was fine. Here's the part that trips people up. The house doesn't immediately feel unaffordable. The first year, maybe even the second, you make it work. You're more careful with spending, you eat out less, you hold off on the vacation, you tell yourself it's temporary, you'll get a raise, things will loosen up, you just need to get settled. But the raise comes, and it goes somewhere. The car needs tires, the kid needs braces, the furnace makes a noise. And slowly, not dramatically, not in a way that looks like a crisis from the outside, the financial life stops expanding. The 401k contributions stay at the minimum for the employer match. The emergency fund never gets past $4,000. The brokerage account stays at zero because there's never quite enough left over to fund it and feel okay about it. The house didn't ruin anyone. It just occupied all the space. That's the illusion. The $500,000 house feels like financial progress. It is an asset. But the decision to buy it at that price, at that payment, at that percentage of real income, that decision has a cost that never shows up on the listing. And the cost isn't measured in dollars. Not yet. It's measured in what doesn't happen. The investments that don't get made, the compounding that doesn't start, the financial flexibility that doesn't exist when something unexpected hits and something always hits. A mortgage payment is fixed. It doesn't care what month it is. It doesn't care that your hours got cut, or your kid got sick, or you needed a new transmission. It shows up on the first of the month every single month for 30 years, demanding its share before anything else gets funded. When that payment is 60% of your take-home income, every other financial decision you make is happening inside a very small box. That's where we're going next. Let's do the actual math on person A and person B. Same income, $105,000. Let's even be generous and say they both put 10% down on their respective homes. Person A, $485,000 home. Finances, $436,500. Monthly payment, pity plus PMI, about $3,750. Maintenance reserve at 1% annually, $485,000 divided by 12, about $404 a month. Total monthly housing cost, $4,154. Person B, $295,000 home. Finances, $265,500. Monthly payment, pity, about $2,200. Maintenance reserve at 1%, $295,000 divided by 12, about $246 a month. Total monthly housing cost, $2,446. Monthly difference, $1,708. Person B invests that $1,708 every month into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. No stock picking, no timing the market, just consistent, boring contributions into something that has returned an average of roughly 10% annually over the last 5 decades, or about 7% after accounting for inflation. Here's what that looks like. Year 10, about $295,000. Year 20, about $1,040,000. Year 30, about $2,060,000, over $2 million. From the difference in housing costs, not from a side hustle, not from a windfall, from one decision made once that compounded quietly in the background while person A was stretching every month just to keep the lights on. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something real, not rhetorical. What's your actual fear about buying a smaller, cheaper home? Is it the school district, the neighborhood, the thought that your friends will see it and think you settled? Or is it something you've never said out loud, that the house is the proof, the signal, the thing that tells the world you made it? Drop it in the comments. I'm not asking to judge it. I'm asking because that answer tells you more about your financial decision-making than your credit score ever will. Now, back to the invisible cost that almost nobody calculates before they sign. The 1% maintenance rule isn't a scare tactic. It's a rough average supported by years of real home ownership data. And what it means in practice is this. On a $485,000 home, you should budget roughly $4,850 a year. Call it $400 a month for things that will break, wear out, fail, leak, crack, or stop working. A roof lasts 20 to 30 years, an HVAC system maybe 15. Water heaters give you 10 to 12 years if you're lucky. These aren't catastrophes, they're just the cost of owning a physical thing that ages. But here's the thing, that maintenance reserve money is gone. It doesn't build equity, it doesn't compound. You spend it on the water heater, and the water heater doesn't appreciate. You spend it on the roof, And the roof doesn't generate a return. It just keeps rain out of your house, which is important. But it's not an investment. Person A is paying $400 a month in phantom costs that evaporate. Person B is paying $246. That $154 difference doesn't sound like much, but over 20 years, assuming person B invests even that gap, it adds another $90,000 to the account. Small numbers, long timelines, that's the whole game. Let's talk about the appreciation argument because it always comes up. But the $500,000 house will be worth more in 20 years. Maybe, probably, in fact, depending on the market. But the question is, more than what? Research from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, looking at very long run housing data across the US, found that residential real estate has historically appreciated at roughly 1% above inflation annually over extended periods. That's real cumulative growth, but net of inflation, it's modest. The S&P 500 over comparable long periods has returned closer to 7% annually after inflation. So if person A's $485,000 home appreciates at 1% real annually for 30 years, the inflation adjusted gain in value is roughly $200,000, meaningful. But person B's investment account, as we calculated, grew past $2 million from the monthly contribution difference alone before we even account for what person B's home appreciated to. Person B came out ahead on the house and built an investment portfolio that person A will likely never catch up to, not because person B is smarter or luckier, but because they left room in their budget for the investment to happen. Here's the second question I want you to sit with, and I'm serious about this one. What would you do with an extra $1,700 a month? Not theoretically, specifically. Would it go to retirement, an HSA, a 529 for your kid? Would it finally kill the last of your student loans? Would it fund the emergency account that's been sitting at $2,000 for 3 years? Because there's never enough left over to grow it? Tell me in the comments what you'd actually do, because that's the money we're talking about. That's the real cost of the bigger house, not the payment. The payment you know about, the opportunity is what disappears silently. At some point in this whole housing conversation, people ask the wrong follow-up question. They hear the math, they see the gap, and then they ask, okay, but how do I buy a cheaper house without feeling like I'm settling? That's still the wrong question. It's still framing the decision around the house, around how it looks, what it signals, whether it meets some internal scorecard. The right question is quieter and harder. What do I actually want my financial life to look like in 15 years? And does this house support that or prevent it? Not your net worth on paper, your actual life. The flexibility to change jobs if you need to. The ability to help your parents if something happens. The option to take a year and do something different without it being a financial catastrophe. The retirement account that lets you stop working when you decide to, not when you run out of options. A house can't give you those things. Liquidity can. Here's a framework that works. And it's not complicated. Before you make any offer on a home, run this test. Take your actual monthly take-home pay, not your gross salary. Your real take-home, and multiply by 0.28. That's your maximum total housing payment. Mortgage, taxes, insurance, all in. If your take-home is $5,900 a month, that number is $1,652. Yes, $1,652. That's the 28% threshold on real income, not gross. I know. That feels impossible in many markets. And for some people in expensive cities, it genuinely is. And they have to make different choices, like renting longer, relocating, or buying with a partner. None of those are failures. They're just honesty about what the math actually allows. But for a lot of people, especially outside the top 10 most expensive metro areas, that threshold is achievable. It just requires buying significantly below what the lender approved. And that's the whole point. Let's run a real-world scenario. You earn $105,000. Take home is $5,900 a month. You have $45,000 saved for a down payment and closing costs. Let's say $35,000 goes down. $10,000 covers costs. At 6.8% interest with $35,000 down, a $275,000 home puts your principal and interest at roughly $1,573. Add taxes and insurance. You're at about $2,050 to $2,150. That's 35% of take home, higher than 28%, but workable, especially if it's your only debt. Now, here's what that leaves every month: $3,750 to cover everything else in your life. From that, you put $600 into your 401k above the employer match, another $500 into a Roth IRA, $400 into a brokerage account, $300 into a high yield savings account, building your emergency fund. That's $1,800 a month going toward your future every month without breaking a sweat. Do that for 20 years at a blended 7% return, and you're looking at a portfolio somewhere north of $920,000, not counting the 401k employer match, not counting Social Security, not counting whatever the house appreciated to. $920,000 from a $275,000 house and a consistent investment habit. The math keeps pointing to the same thing. The wealth isn't in the house. It's in the consistency that the house either allows or destroys. Vanguard has published research tracking investor behavior across millions of retirement accounts for decades. One of the clearest findings: investors who contributed consistently, same amount, every month through market highs and crashes and everything in between, accumulated dramatically more than investors who made larger, irregular contributions. The behavior mattered more than the amount. Consistency requires margin. Margin requires affordable housing. This isn't a coincidence, it's a mechanism. When your housing cost is 65% of take home, there's no margin. Any disruption, a job change, a medical bill, an unexpected repair, doesn't just cause stress, it interrupts the contributions. And interrupted contributions don't just cost you what you didn't put in, they cost you the compounding on every dollar that should have followed. That's the hidden tax of the expensive house. It's not one big moment of failure, it's 1,000 small interruptions to a habit that needed to stay uninterrupted. There's one more thing I want to say, and I want to say it directly. The pressure to buy as much house as you can afford is real. And it comes from everywhere: lenders, real estate agents, relatives, the culture. The idea that a bigger house means you're doing better is so deeply baked into the American story that even people who know the math still feel it. You're allowed to feel it and still make a different choice. Buying a smaller house is not giving up. It is not a consolation prize. It is a specific, deliberate decision to prioritize what happens after the purchase: the investments, the flexibility, the years of financial breathing room over what the house looks like in a photo. The people who end up financially free in their 50s, not theoretically free, actually free, almost none of them got there by buying the biggest house they could qualify for. They got there by staying consistent, staying liquid, and not letting a fixed monthly obligation eat the resource they needed to compound. So, you've got the pre-approval letter. You know what the lender says you can afford. Now go home and figure out what you say you can afford based on your take home, your goals, and the financial life you actually want to build. Those are different numbers. Pick the right one. Subscribe if you want to keep thinking this way. One video a week, no fluff.